All right, and welcome to the Intersection Podcast. This is Miovision's interpretation of a way to bring amazing, bright subject matter leaders into the intersection and get their perspective on all things mobility, modernization. And we are excited about our guest today, the CEO of ITS America. And we are in Grapevine, Texas at ITS America. So welcome to the podcast, Laura Chace.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thank you for coming. And for everybody following along at home, maybe just share with everybody who you are and what you do at ITS.
So I'm Laura Chace, CEO of ITS America. I've been with the organization for about 8 years, became CEO about 18 months ago. And our focus is on mainstreaming deployment of technology in the transportation system across modes in support of a safer, greener, smarter future for all. So benefiting communities.
Wow. So that is a mouthful.
It is.
And also like all modes of transit, all communities, which I think is a pretty broad mandate. So in 8 years, what have you seen as the biggest transformation that you've seen the ITS America group make or evolve into over that period of time?
Yeah, well, I think it's actually happening right now, and it's what we call digital infrastructure. Which is this concept that we have a lot of data out there. We have a lot of digital tools, and we really need to build this digital infrastructure layer that will interact with our physical infrastructure so that we can actually dynamically manage our resources, so we can enable safety, enable sustainable mobility, and provide equitable services. And right now, the tradition is to invest in a historic way, which means how we historically have done so, I should say, which means investing in the physical side. But what we're really seeing is this incredible need to invest in the digital side so we can actually use all of that data and all those tools to make better decisions.
Awesome. So I'm going to welcome to the conversation our CEO for Miovision, who's been on maybe this journey for a little bit longer as well, 17, almost 18 years in this space. So Kurtis, what are your thoughts? I mean, you've been partnered with ITS for a period of time, just reacting to Laura's kind of mandate. It sounds like a pretty big moonshot objective, but what have you seen as the evolution for ITS in this mandate that they're working to fulfill into?
Yeah, I mean, I think this show was really exciting because I think there's like a scaled conversation happening now around digital infrastructure that's been maybe more nascent in previous years. So I think that's amazing. I think one of the things that we think a lot about is if you look at the built form of a city, it's a combination of public infrastructure and private infrastructure, right? So you think of like the roads, the services that are underground. These are provided for by public sector. There's like standards about how you have to interface to them, right? If you want to get your site plan approved, you got to make sure that you put your driveway in the right place. Those kind of things. And then you have like private development, things like condos and retail malls and things like that. And that model has worked really well for the physical built form. But in the technology universe, if you look at sort of how the consumer internet came online, it was very much private sector dominated, right? There's really no like public infrastructure in the same way that there is in the physical built form. So I think this conversation about digital infrastructure is super important. And I think getting to the point where through industry organizations like ITSA, we can start to discern the difference between like what should be public infrastructure, provided for and governed by in the ways that we know how to do in the public sector, and then what should be private sector. I think that's a super important conversation that I'm excited to see starting to happen.
Very cool.
Yeah.
I mean, Laura, we talked a little bit about this over the course of the week too, like the role of private business, private enterprise, like somebody like Miovision or any of the other our contemporaries that are here as well, public interest in the form of government, as well as multiple stakeholders that should be involved in this to really support an inclusive, diverse modernization. So
Yeah.
do you have any thoughts on the idea about like who are the players that should be working in an integrated fashion to help serve this modernization need?
Yeah, well, so that's exactly what we're trying to do by bringing in companies like Miovision and others on the private sector side. So everyone from like the cloud computing companies, the chip makers, the telecoms, the traffic management companies, systems integrators. So all really the automakers, fleet providers, all the broad sector approach on the private sector side. And then the public sector side, it really is all levels of government. So it's state, city, MPO, county, bring everyone together, because what we're trying to do and our focus, right, is bringing all those voices and all those disparate entities together to create a national plan. Because to Kurtis's point, we need that architecture and we need that structure, but it has to be national and it has to be interoperable. And that we don't have that right now. That doesn't exist in the digital world. And you talk a little bit about sort of, who roles and responsibilities. And the public sector is already seeing that they can manage their physical streets and the physical right of way. But what they're seeing is that the private sector has tools that they can use that can dynamically change how they're interacting on that right of way. And the public sector doesn't have the same tools. And that's what this would enable. It would enable our infrastructure, our streets, to be as smart as the vehicles and things, using them, and enable the public sector to have these interoperable tools to use the data and be able to manage that public right of way dynamically in a digital world, which is where all of transportation is going in this digital transformation.
Very cool. Kurtis, do you have any thoughts on kind of the multiple kind of multifaceted integrated way that this needs to be thought about and communicated?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have lots of analogies in the built form. When you go get your site plan, you'll often pay development charges or park land dedication fees or things that you're sort of paying back into the system that you're going to benefit from as a private land operator. So I think it's trying to map what are the equivalent discernment between public infrastructure, private infrastructure, and then what are the economic models that ensure that public infrastructure is evolving and maintaining in the public good. Was involved in Toronto. There was a project that Sidewalk Labs, which was Google, was proposing in Toronto, and kind of came in with a view that we'll apply the same consumer internet business model that we've that's made Google successful. We'll apply that to civic data. And what was super interesting to see was civil society pushed back big time and said hold on a second, there's this whole bunch of privacy implications, and there's also just value capture implications, right? Tax dollars are paying for the data to be created. We can't just hand this over to big multinational. So it's got a front row seat to sort of how there's a different type of internet that the civic internet, the civic data internet is going to evolve, I think, very differently than the consumer internet did. In the consumer internet, we were happy to give away all of our private data in exchange for free cat videos on YouTube. But that the experience in Toronto showed that there's much more focus needs to be placed on the grant of social license with respect to the data that's coming out of our built form, such that cities can continue to control their right of ways and their infrastructure, and that it doesn't just evolve in a way that services private interests as opposed to the social good.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked to, I don't know if there's certainly on your team, Laura, and there's been some talks this week so far about diversity, inclusion, and making sure that we do this modernization around mobility that's not just focused on four-wheeled vehicles going into and out of intersections. That modernization of mobility also has to be considered of walkers, bikers, scooters, or people on buses. So, maybe share with the organization or share with the folks at home, what does diversity, inclusion as it relates to this modernization, what does it mean to you in your office and the mandate that you have in serving the broader constituents of the entire United States in this case? Yeah,
so I would say I would answer that in a couple of ways. So one way is, to your point, we are multimodal in our focus. So we don't just focus on, for example, just single occupancy vehicles, right? So we want to have digital solutions and a digital layer that can work for transit, that can work for passenger vehicles, that can work for fleets, that can work for cyclists, pedestrians, and for advanced air mobility, which is another area that is really a part of this conversation, because ultimately that's coming down the pike too, and that all needs to integrate with the surface and the ground transportation. It's going to do that through digital APIs and digital tools. And so that's a piece of it. The other piece of it that I would say is something that we've talked about a lot, which is you have to look at who your users are. And if you look at, more than half the population is women, Heaviest users of transit are women, but yet we don't necessarily design our systems and design the operation of the system with those users in mind. So if you're a caregiver and you're trying to take transit, right, your options might be limited in terms of what's going to work for you. If safety is a concern, if you're a female and there's safety is a concern, again, you have limited options. There are ways, as we're offering new services by using these new innovations and digital tools, there are ways to address some of those, what I'm going to say, inequities in the system to make it work better for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think your API comment, I think, also rings pretty true to, I think, our shared vision, Kurtis, which is like, how do we have an interoperability even with our own platform that it allows for other technology or layers to be integrated within our offering. But any thoughts kind of reacting to this concept of true diversity, true inclusive to various forms of mobility in your experience and here at Miovision?
I would think like digitization of industries has been happening for 2 decades, right? And I think our industry has, for a multitude of reasons, has been resilient. I don't want to say resistant, right? But resilient to the change. But I think we're starting to see like that change is coming, right? And when change is inevitable, it either happens to you or through you, right? And I think the risk is that if change happens to this industry, it'll happen from another industry who needs the data the data and the digital systems to behave in certain ways to enable that industry's objective, right? So, for example, car companies are rapidly digitizing, cars are becoming computers on wheels. Do we really want the digital infrastructure to service selling more cars, right? Or for the telcos to define digital infrastructure that helps them sell more network, right? Probably not. Whereas if we can do it through this industry, this industry is filled with lots of people that are really passionate about creating, greener, safer, more efficient, more inclusive cities, right? Like it's a lot of why the various brands, if you walk around the show floor, that's